Back on the campaign trail, so many Republicans told us that Donald Trump was actually the candidate for peace, including his running mate, J.D. Vance, despite Donald Trump's blatantly neoconservative record from his first term. But now that we're on the cusp of war with Iran, what are those same people saying now? Well, some of them, I'd imagine, aren't saying much. In fact, a lot of them are probably sitting awkwardly in silence, hoping nobody notices how foolish they look now. Some of them are just supporting it, manufacturing consent for the war that Donald Trump wants to start, and using the exact same playbook, mind you, from the Iraq war days, not changing a single thing. But having said that, though, there are some prominent voices in MAGA world who are actually choosing to speak out against war with Iran. The problem, however, is that they're tap dancing around the real culprit here, which is Donald Trump, because, of course. And instead of choosing to directly condemn his saber rattling against a country that poses no threat to us, these cowards are instead choosing to oppose the prospect of war with Iran in the most passive-aggressive way I have ever seen. And they're doing this despite Donald Trump greenlighting Israel's attacks in the first place and now saying it's possible that we do get directly involved in a confrontation with Iran. But before we get to the tepid condemnations from MAGA diehards, if you can even call it that, I do want to explain how he is already complicit if this does happen, and talk about how Trump is taking the bait from Netanyahu as well as Republicans who are trying to goad him into a full-blown war with Iran. Jake Johnson of Common Dreams reports, U.S. President Donald Trump suggested Sunday that American forces could get involved in the intensifying military conflict that Israel started late last week with a barrage of attacks on Iran, prompting large-scale retaliatory strikes and warnings of a prolonged and catastrophic war. Trump told ABC News senior political correspondent Rachel Scott that the U.S. is not currently involved in the conflict, which is false. The U.S. has helped Israel shoot down Iranian missiles, and American fighter jets are reportedly patrolling the sky in the Middle East to protect personnel and installations. One Israeli official told the Jerusalem Post that there was full and complete coordination with the Americans on Israel's early Friday bombardment of Iran, which set off the conflict. Now, on top of that, Donald Trump tweeted, Iran should have signed the, quote, deal I told them to sign. What a shame and a waste of human life. Simply stated, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I said it over and over again. Everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran. Now, I'm not sure how he expects millions and millions of people to evacuate Tehran immediately. That sounds completely infeasible. But with this tweet, he's either approving of more bombs being dropped by Israel on Iran at best, or at worst, he could be signaling that Israel is about to do something much more nefarious in Iran's largest city, which means lots of casualties. Now, I'm not going to speculate further on what that is, but I do fear the worst given what's already happened in Gaza. But let's be very clear here. Donald Trump was never, ever serious about peace with Iran. He was never serious about securing a deal with Iran. And this should have been obvious to every single person with eyes from the beginning, since he is the one that chose to unilaterally withdraw from the JCPOA. This is the Iran nuclear agreement that Obama negotiated, which Trump withdrew from in his very first term. The International Atomic Energy Agency verified multiple times that Iran was indeed in compliance with this deal. So they weren't creating a nuclear bomb, and the West was appeased. But that angered Republicans and Netanyahu, who were using fears of Iran becoming a nuclear power as a justification to one day invade them. So by unilaterally tearing up the JCPOA, Trump made war with Iran that much more likely. So it was cartoonishly stupid for anyone to think that he was ever negotiating with Iran in good faith after his actions got us to this point in the first place. And here we are yet again on the cusp of war with Iran, thanks to Donald Trump, and now he's escalating instead of de-escalating. And Benjamin Netanyahu is now doing everything in his power to goad Donald Trump into a full-scale invasion of Iran, not only by provoking Iran into retaliating against them by illegally bombing them in the first place, but by tailoring his pro-war message to Donald Trump in American media, which it's astounding that they're allowing him to make this point. Nonetheless, here's Netanyahu saying why our country should go to war with Iran for him.
These people who chant death to America, try to assassinate President Trump twice, killed 241 of your Marines in Beirut, killed and injured thousands of American soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq, try to bomb a restaurant in Washington, D.C., chant death to America, burn the American flag. Do you want these people to have nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them to your cities? Of course not.
It's Tel Aviv, tomorrow it's New York. I understand America first. I don't understand America dead.
So he's saying without evidence that Iran was behind both of the Trump assassination attempts. And when he was asked about whether or not he has intelligence on this, he claimed that it was from one of his proxies that told him this, meaning he made it up. And he knows that some isolationist, libertarian-minded MAGA Republicans might be against war with Iran because that's not very, quote, America first, whatever that means. But he's responding to that claim by making an appeal to Trump directly by arguing that it actually is in America's best interest to invade Iran since an attack against the U.S. by Iran is imminent. Now, that is complete and utter horseshit. That is not going to happen. But if he can work Americans into a frenzy and get Trump to think that this is personal, then maybe, just maybe, he will get Trump to do what he's been trying to get a U.S. president to do for a very long time, which is go to war with Iran for him. But aside from the personal appeal that he's making to Trump, he's also rolling out the same old tired playbook about Iran getting super close to having a nuclear weapon. And I've got to tell you, this is nothing new for those hearing this for the first time. We've been told that Iran was this close to getting a nuclear weapon for decades now.
Take Iran about 12 months to enrich enough nuclear material for a single nuclear weapon.
United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken is warning that Iran is potentially just months away or less from nuclear breakpoint.
Iran is 2 months away from a nuclear weapon, and it's a victory to get them 1 year away?
Iran could be less than a month away from building a nuclear weapon.
Netanyahu has made 2 tough-talking TV appearances, saying that Iran is just months away from making a nuclear bomb.
What is important to understand is that you have to dismantle the entire terror empire, and especially before its main practitioners, the terror states of Iran and Iraq, acquire nuclear weapons. And this, I think, has been a wake-up call from hell. It is telling us, you have the power now to act.
So for decades now, Iran has been this close to getting a nuclear weapon, but yet the worst fear of the West has never actually come to fruition. That's really strange. It's almost like what they were saying was bullshit. This lie has been used again and again and again to manufacture consent for a war with Iran. And to be clear, I don't think that any country should have nuclear weapons. That includes Iran and the United States. But in the event Iran were to ever get a nuclear weapon, it's obviously for the sake of deterrence, which is reasonable given the threats that they've faced from both Israel and the United States for decades now. But they want you to think that if Iran gets a nuke, they're going to drop it on our heads since they hate us for no good reason. But in actuality, Iran isn't going to do that, and they have a good reason to hate us if they do indeed hate us. See, our leaders don't tell you this, but the United States and the United Kingdom teamed up to overthrow Iran's democratically elected leader in the 1950s, Mohammad Mossadegh. Now, why would they want to do something like that? Well, you see, he wanted to nationalize Iran's oil supply so Iranian citizens could benefit from it instead of Western powers like the UK. But we couldn't let that stand, so we installed the Shah, who was a brutal puppet dictator who let the West continue to exploit Iran's natural resources, which then led to frustration by the Iranian people, who chose to rise up and overthrow said dictator by theocratic revolutionaries in the late 1970s. So suffice to say, if Iran hates us, they have a very good reason to hate us. But that doesn't mean that they're going to nuke us the second they get a nuclear weapon, even if nobody should have a nuclear weapon. Common sense dictates that they'd want a nuclear weapon to stop us from invading them again, since, we've done that in the past. But the problem is that if you hear about these facts, you might feel a little bit apprehensive about the prospect of war with Iran and think that it might be illegitimate, which is why these inconvenient facts aren't mentioned by war propagandists, because they want you to think that war with Iran is good because it benefits them. See, it's much easier to portray them as the bad guys and us as the good guys and claim that us invading them is actually good for the Iranian people and they'd be happy to welcome us, giving them freedom. But I mean, this is the same shit that they told us before they invaded Iraq, and take a guess who was beating the war drums back then as well. Of course, it was Benjamin Netanyahu.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone. There is a new age. Something new is happening.
That clip was from 2002, and as you can see, it aged very, very well. But here we are again, 23 years later, and they're not even bothering to switch up the playbook, not even tweak it a little bit. It's the same shit they sold us to get us into a war with Iraq. And it's because they think that we're dumb enough to fall for the same line of bullshit again. But you know what? They may be right. They might actually be right about that. You've already got right-wing media and Republican politicians working in lockstep to manufacture consent for a war with Iran to varying degrees, and the reason why they're saying things like this is because it's effective, unfortunately.
I would urge President Trump to go all in to make sure that when this operation is over, there's nothing left standing in Iran regarding their nuclear program. If that means providing bombs, provide bombs. If that means flying,
busting bombs,
whatever bombs. If it means flying with Israel, fly with Israel.
Look, I think it is very much in the interest of America to see regime change. I don't think there's any redeeming the Ayatollah. He is filled with hatred.
Is this another Iraq, or is it something entirely different? Well, let me tell you what makes this moment unlike anything else we have faced before. First, this was not a call to war. This was not a land invasion. They do not want what we want. We choose life. They literally choose death. That is as clear as it is. Do you choose life or do you choose death? That is a culture of death.
It is so ironic to see an American who supports Israel accuse any other nation of having a culture of death. Israel is carrying out a genocide of Palestinians as we speak, and that genocide is overwhelmingly supported by the population of Israel. America killed more than 1 million Iraqis in the name of self-defense. And Americans overwhelmingly supported that war at the time. Not to mention, we let our own citizens die due to a lack of health care. Our HHS secretary is basically against modern medicine, including vaccines. Republicans were talking about sacrificing human beings just a couple of weeks into the pandemic for the sake of the fucking economy. Our country is the personification of pro-death. So maybe Glenn Beck should have a little bit of self-awareness before judging other countries. And he says that they don't want the same thing as us, but I've got to ask, who's us, Glenn? Because you don't want the same thing as me. You're more pro-death than any leader in Iran, full stop. But, putting aside his lack of self-awareness there, you can see that there's already an effort to gin up support for the total annihilation of Iran's nuclear program at best and regime change at worst. And right on cue, mainstream media is working in tandem with Republicans and neocons to manufacture consent for a war, with news outlets like CNN platforming Netanyahu, and also Yoav Gallant to tell us why America is obligated to go to war with Iran for Israel. And I've got to ask, are there any other war criminals wanted by the International Criminal Court that we can consult with for their expertise before we make a decision? Perhaps we can bring out Dick Cheney and George W. Bush, or create an AI of Henry Kissinger to get his advice while we're at it. It is ridiculous. Like, this is what happens whenever the entire establishment gears up for war. They line up in one direction and they push one cohesive narrative, which begs the question, where's all the supposedly anti-war voices in MAGA that told us that Donald Trump would never start a new war? Where are those people? That's what we're going to turn our attention to now. And spoiler alert, the most prominent voices in MAGA, at best, are only tepidly condemning the prospect of war with Iran while making sure to avoid criticizing Donald Trump like the plague. And instead, what they're doing is they're calling out people encouraging Trump to go to war with Iran because perhaps, I guess they forgot that as president, Donald Trump has agency here. It is a very delicate balancing act that they're doing, but nonetheless, here's how some of them are choosing to thread the needle. Tucker Carlson, for example, tweeted out, the real divide isn't between people who support Israel and people who support Iran or the Palestinians. The real divide is between those who casually encourage violence and those who seek to prevent it, between warmongers and peacemakers. Who are the warmongers? They would include anyone who's calling Donald Trump today to demand airstrikes and other direct U.S. military involvement in a war with Iran. On that list, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, Rupert Murdoch, Ike Perlmutter, and Miriam Adelson. At some point, they will all have to answer for this, but you should know their names now. Right, so they all have to answer for this, but not Donald Trump himself, who actually is in control, who greenlit Israel's attacks on Iran in the first place. Interesting. But let's come back to Tucker Carlson here, because Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted out this long-ass fucking screed saying anyone slobbering for the U.S. to become fully involved in the Israel-Iran war is not America first / MAGA. Wishing for murder of innocent people is disgusting. We are sick and tired of foreign wars, all of them. But if you read this whole thing, which I'm not going to do, she didn't address Donald Trump's warmongering a single time. See, everyone within MAGA isn't really America first, according to Marjorie Taylor Greene, if they're pro-war. Although Trump, the chief chud, leader of all MAGA, who's leading us into a war with Iran right now, just tweeted that America first actually does include war with Iran because stopping them from getting a nuclear weapon is America first by his standards. Moreover, Iran warhawk and fellow MAGA chud Mark Levin responded to Marjorie Greene saying, "Who died and named Marjorie Taylor Greene the queen of MAGA? Trump is MAGA. He received 77 million votes. You're a little-known politician from Georgia. Hate to break the news to you. We're Team Trump. Go Trump." He's kind of got a point there, Marjorie. Maybe this tepid approach of you saying, "Oh, well, gee golly, guys, war with Iran just doesn't seem like a very America first thing to do," isn't fucking working. Perhaps you should actually condemn the president himself who ran on America first more directly. See, this is what happens when you base your movement on a wannabe dictator's vague slogan that is completely bereft of policy substance. But she's not alone, because going back to Tucker Carlson here, even though he talked tough and named names in that tweet that we saw, there's one name that he absolutely won't name, and that name is Donald J. Trump's. Don't get me wrong, he'll name Trump to give him a sloppy blowjob, and when I say sloppy, I mean so sloppy Trump has to wipe his ass afterwards sloppy, but he refuses to condemn Trump's warmongering, even though Trump is the one with all of the power right now, which doesn't make any fucking sense. Nonetheless, let's hear him out.
I actually really love Trump. I think he's a deeply humane, kind person, and I am saying this because I'm really afraid that my country's going to be further weakened by this. I think we're going to see the end of American empire, obviously. Other nations would like to see that, and this is a perfect way to scuttle the USS America on the shoals of Iran. But it's also going to end, I believe, Trump's presidency and effectively end it. And so that's why I'm saying this.
What do you mean by that? That's coming from you. That's
you get. Look, I knew Bush. I knew George W. Bush. We had, family connections to Bush. I knew Bush personally. I still see Bush sometimes, and of course, he hates me, and he does because I criticized him on Iraq. And that war is the sum total, from a historical perspective, of his administration. But I knew him, and he had all kinds of plans for the things that he wanted to do. But once domestically, right, to improve the country.
Right.
And you may agree or disagree, but in his mind, he wasn't just about the invasion of Iraq in March of 2000.
Oh, no. He was going to redo Social Security.
100%,
He had all that.
100%.
All types of. He was going to take care of the entitlements issue.
And he really thought it was going to work.
Yep.
And you could laugh at that or whatever, but the point is, the second you get enmeshed in a real war, not a fake, let's go bomb the villagers and declare success, though we don't even have a good track record. Why are the Houthis still there?
No,
there's a whole other question,
right,
which is how prepared is the U.S. military for a real conflict? And the answer is totally unprepared. Scary unprepared. I don't think people understand that. But anyway, the only reason I'm saying any of this is because I really, really care. And it's been, what a disaster for me personally. I mean, it's like the last thing I wake up, all these texts, well, I can't believe you're so evil, you hate this, that. I just want to restate, I don't hate anybody. And to the extent I do hate people, I try to repent of it. I don't want to hate anybody. I really don't. I just don't want my country to be further weakened or destroyed by another one of these wars. And boy, if you can't connect the dots after 25 years of this shit, you're either too dumb to participate in the conversation, or you're, like Mark Levin, just a liar who doesn't care.
Embarrassing. The same people who portray themselves as alpha, unapologetic truth tellers have to tiptoe around what they really want to say so as to not offend their dear leader. Maybe we should call him Cucker instead. Hey, Cucker, why don't you pop his balls out of your fucking mouth and stop complimenting him and actually criticize him harshly if you genuinely want to stop a war with Iran, you fucking coward. Oh, well, gee whiz, sir, another war would make you seem like Bush, and you don't want to go down in history as another Bush now, would you? Right. Let's not pretend like you also didn't support Bush's invasion of Iraq yourself, Cucker. You called Iraqis semi-literate primitive monkeys, so let's not do revisionist history about your own record, because the internet never forgets. But putting that aside, even though Cucker went out of his way to avoid hurting Daddy Trump's feelings, it wasn't enough, because Trump tweeted, "Somebody please explain to kooky Tucker Carlson that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon." Well, it turns out walking on eggshells for him didn't actually make a difference in the end. So you not only fell out of Trump's good grace, but you also look like a pussy too. Good job, Cucker. But let's also address the elephant in the room, and by elephant I mean Sloppy Steve, who says that he also doesn't support war with Iran, but like Tucker and Marjorie, he lacks the spine to call out Trump directly.
I'm a big supporter of Israel.
Yes.
And I'm telling people, hey, if we get sucked into this war, which inexorably looks like it's going to happen on the combat side, it's going to not just blow up the coalition, it's also going to thwart what we're doing with the most important thing, which is the deportation of the illegal alien invaders that are here. If we don't do that, we don't have a country. And you just see right now, they're doubling, tripling out. This is actually potentially a real civil war in our biggest cities. And President Trump has to have our backing. And this came out of nowhere.
Did it though? Because Israel has wanted a war with Iran for decades, and they've been trying to get every U.S. president to go along with it, but you dipshits elected a mark like Trump who might just be dumb enough to do it. But his pitch is pretty hilarious because he's saying that war with Iran would blow up the MAGA movement as if it was premised on policies or a principled opposition to war and not Trump dick riding. And he also gently says that this wouldn't be in the best interest of the MAGA movement, as if Trump wouldn't know what his supporters would go for or wouldn't go for. He knows that it's a cult and they'll go for whatever the fuck he says they should go for. And Bannon makes it seem like he's speaking to Trump supporters in this clip, but in actuality, he's really relaying this message to Donald Trump because he's too much of a pussy to be blunt. So he's trying to use reverse psychology on Trump to convince him to not go to war because it interfere with the racist things that Trump wants to do. It's not the war that's inherently bad because people will die. It's that war is bad because racism is more important to Steve Bannon. Incredible logic here. And we've just gone over a couple of examples, but how many other supposed anti-war Trump supporters who boasted about Trump being the candidate for peace are also choosing to just defend this or remain silent? The answer is, there's a lot. There's a lot of cowards, but there is one who actually chose to be principled and forcefully condemn Donald Trump, and that individual is Dave Smith. And while I have no respect for any Trump supporter, I at least appreciate him condemning Trump directly and not mincing words and following up said condemnation with a call for consequences.
Yeah, Donald Trump looks, and man, I supported him this last year. I apologize for doing so. It was a bad calculation. At the time, it seemed like the right one. But he should be impeached and removed for this one. Wow. And not on some not on some ridiculous Nancy Pelosi. Of course, the Congress will never do it because they're all a bunch of corrupt hacks.
This is the one thing they support. This is
Donald Trump should be impeached and removed for this. All of his supporters should turn on him. It's the absolute betrayal of everything that he ran and campaigned on and everything that he stood for. And I will say, despite the fact that, Donald Trump supporters have been labeled like a cult following, and that certainly is true for a percentage of his supporters, he is going to lose his coalition over this.
We'll see about that. But even though he still gets a Fell for It Again award, I've got to say that it is really nice to see somebody admit that they were wrong and even apologize for supporting Donald Trump. Apology not accepted, but I do appreciate the gesture and I give you extra credit for calling for his impeachment. Having said that, though, even though you're owning up to your mistakes, there were people like myself, as well as Kyle Kulinski and others who were warning you that this was going to happen. It's not something that, we predicted on a whim. We don't have crystal balls with the exception of Kyle Kulinski. We said this because we made fact-based assessments because we looked at Trump's foreign policies from his first term. It's really not rocket science. All you have to do is look at what he did in his first term, and past behavior is an indicator of future behavior. It was already obvious to everybody that was paying attention that Trump was not anti-war, quite the contrary. Now, it's not to say that, Biden or Kamala were doves, but this idea that Donald Trump would have brought about world peace is extremely fucking delusional. Now, I'm not saying that that's what Dave Smith claimed, but if your main concern was no new foreign wars, you were foolish to ever think that Trump was on board. He's always been a warmonger. You just wish-casted his foreign policy positions on him that he never actually had. Nonetheless, I don't want to shit on him too much because I am thankful that he's at least one of millions of Trump supporters who's actually willing to directly call out Donald Trump. And the question is, will others follow suit? And the answer is probably not. And I say this because the Elon Musk kerfuffle taught us that no matter how hard you go after Donald Trump, it's always better in the end to have Trump as a friend than to have Trump as an enemy, especially if there's money to be made or if you have an audience or constituents who are part of his cult, because they don't want you to deviate from what he wants because he is cult leader, after all. So if Trump does do the unthinkable and gets us into a war with Iran, I fully expect most of his little sycophants to be completely on board. That is, until years after the fact, which is when they'll pretend like they were against it all along. And in the future, when people dig up this clip of me saying this, when I'm proven right, I want future viewers to know that I'm not basing my prediction on magical thinking. I'm basing my prediction on past behavior. See, I grew up in the Iraq War era, and it was genuinely radicalizing, to put it mildly. The things that they said to get us to invade a country that didn't attack us was wild, and I never fell for it as young as I was, as conservative as I was at the time, though all of my political beliefs weren't necessarily formed yet. But the collective deja vu that we're all feeling is a warning sign that things are about to hit the fan, and we should maybe not let it happen this time. Let's not let it come to that this time. For once, let's actually stop gobbling up the fucking bullshit that's being shoved down our throats by the mainstream media and neoconservative warmongering politicians. Let's actually use critical thinking for once and unequivocally and resoundingly say no to war. Not just because it wouldn't be in our best economic interests, but because the lives of the Iranian people who'd be disproportionately affected by this, they actually matter. Life matters. And the fact that so many people don't give a fuck about what would happen to the Iranians is disgusting, but it's so on brand for America.